I'm sure most of you have heard of the mystical creature, the unicorn, but have never actually seen one. Legacy, to many of you, is probably also like this mystical creature. You've heard about it, but you're not exactly sure what it is. Today, the purpose of my presentation is to provide you with visuals so you will have a better understanding of what was included in Phase 1 of the Legacy Project, which was completed as of April 22nd, 2021. Our church was built in 1871 as St. Thomas's Episcopal Church in memory of Bishop Thomas Church Brownell, the founder of Trinity College. It was purchased by Union Baptist Church of Hartford in 1925 and listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1979. The parish hall was built in 1895 and replaced with the addition in the early 1980s. The basement of the new addition, which was not even 10 years old, as well as the sanctuary basement, which was now 125 years old, were having issues with standing water. It should be noted that there are underground springs that flow through this area, making their way to the Connecticut River. So many of the houses in the area have the same problems with groundwater. Therefore, under the leadership of Loveness Harris and the trustee board, in 1996, they hired AEG Design Build Inc. to do an assessment of the water issues in the addition basement and the sanctuary basement and make recommendations for abatement. The cost to abate water issues in both buildings was approximately $54,000 in 1996. In June of 1996, the church voted to move forward with the project. Now we'll fast forward 25 years to 2019 when we received a $20,000 grant from the State Historical Preservation Office to have a conditions assessment of the sanctuary completed by historical architect Lynn Cole Smith and her team of structural, mechanical, plumbing, roofing, and electrical engineers. They produced a document which identified and prioritized necessary repairs and improvements in a logical and cost-effective manner. The church voted again in November 2019 to move forward with the recommendations in the conditions assessment and the water abatement project. Legacy Phase 1, 2020 to 2021. The infiltration of water due to malfunctioning roof and sub-level drainage systems was identified as the greatest threat to our structure, as evidenced by ponding water in the 5,000 square foot dirt floor basement, which results in high humidity that fosters the growth of wood-eating fungus and corrosion, as well as the deterioration of mortar, roof sheathing, and flashings. The contractors which were used were AIELLO for electrical, Budget Dry for the vapor barrier sump pumps and dehumidifiers, J.P. Carroll for gutters, ROTO for storm drain clearing, Sager Healthy Homes for mold abatement, Phil Johnson for the repair of LALLY columns, Peter Glovinsky replaced the dropped floor, and James Grant was the structural engineer who donated his services to do an assessment of the LALLY columns. In December, Roto-Rooter unclogged 6 storm drains. They used water pressure and that roto wheel cut through years of impacted dirt and junk that had built up and clogged the drains, which also prevented the water from flowing to the main line. 4 drains flow through the main line, which flows through the dirt floor of the basement and out to join the city network. 1 joins a line which branches out to join lines which flow under the grounds of the front of the church. And 1 empties into the drain in the large parking lot. We are so thankful that Roto-Rooter was able to clear the drains and we did not have to have the parking lot dug up to have the drainage system repaired. Structural engineer James Grant donated his services in December to do an assessment of the LALLY columns, or also known as support columns, in the basement. The columns were actually named after John Lally, who immigrated from Ireland to Boston in the 1800s. He was a master mason and owned a construction company. After quite a few collapses, he invented vertical LALLY columns in 1898 to support horizontal beams that have to span a long distance. LALLY columns are steel columns that are filled with concrete. Mr. Grant identified 17 columns that needed to be either replaced, a footer added, or sistered by adding one next to take the load off of the corroded one. The picture on the bottom left shows a corroded column lying on the floor under the porch area where they take the coffins out. Not one of the support columns under the porch are left. All of them are corroded. The middle photo shows the steel so corroded that it has exposed the concrete. These photos also show the inadequate lighting in the basement, approximately 3 or 4 lights for 5,000 square feet. These are some of the photos of the fungus, mushrooms, and mold that we found on the wood beams in the basement, on the ceiling, walls, and floor. Sager Healthy Homes did the mold abatement. They used HEPA vacuum cleaners with 3 filters each and filled a total of 6 bags. They used an air scrubber during the surface work and released it outside through a window. An enzyme-based cleaner was used, hydrogen peroxide for stains, and they used fogging to release an ultrafine mist of plant enzymes and biologicals in all of the areas of the basement and sanctuary. They also treated the sanctuary gratis, at no charge to the church, and we thank Mr. Sager for his generosity. Electrical upgrades identified in the conditions assessment needed to be done because moisture had caused corrosion to circuit breakers and breaker boxes. The basement was dark with only 3 or 4 lights for a 5,000 square foot area. There were not even enough circuits or outlets to support the new machinery which needed to be installed for the water abatement. The third photo from the left shows one circuit breaker which was not connected by screws, but was floating in the air and was being propped up by a stick and resting on another wire. There were many exposed wires which were not covered by a metal plate, and the electricians also showed me where one of the wires was slowly burning. The red arrow shows a close-up of the burn. A total of 16 4-foot LED work lights, new circuits, breaker boxes, outlets, and an emergency exit light were installed by AIELLO. In February, Budget Dry installed 2 dehumidifiers to begin drying out the moisture. 2 condensate pumps temporarily released moisture into the pit. Plumbing would be done when the rest of the job was completed in April. These dehumidifiers use the MERV13 filters, which trap smaller particles, including viruses. These filters initially need to be changed every 3 months until the dirt settles, and then we'll be able to go a little bit longer, maybe every 5 or 6 months. The infiltration of water caused deterioration of end floor joists, resulting in floor dropping by approximately 6 inches on one end. This porch is supposed to be an emergency egress in the sanctuary, but it cannot be used because of the dropped floor. The first photo shows how far the baseboard has dropped from the edge of the white wall. Peter Glavinsky of Managing Properties replaced the floor in February. The first photo on the left shows the removal of the floor, which we were surprised to find that it drops into an 8-foot pit. Intrusion of water from the roof compromised the end floor joists, so they no longer fit into the notches. You can see them in the middle and picture on the right. As indicated in the conditions assessment, we were supposed to reuse any materials that we could and only replace with the same kind, though new and improved. Peter reused the baseboard. He also reused a hand-carved wooden doorstop, and he reused most of the decorative lip molding above the baseboard. He had to recreate part of the molding because of the water damage. He also had to replace the oak floors with real oak hardwood, not laminate or vinyl. In March, we rented a 30-foot dumpster for a week to clean out junk and rotten wood in the basement. Phil also began cleaning out the first outside storage unit since there was some room left in the dumpster. After clean out. It looks terrible, but it is actually very solid. Making this an attractive, usable space will also be our goal. For your information, this area used to be the men's bathroom and where the men would come to change before and after they were baptized. The women's lounge was in the old parish house. I was baptized here 60 years ago, so you can see the effects of 60 years of moisture buildup. More photos of post-cleanout. In March, Phil Johnson, general contractor, either replaced or repaired 17 lolly columns. He also replaced the corroded legs of the air handler stand. You will see the before and after photos on the left. The two photos on the right show lolly columns that were sistered next to those compromised by corrosion. They happen to be located under the baptism pool. Phil also constructed wooden molds for the footers. It should be noted that since there were no lolly columns left standing under the porch area, that area was dropping, as evidenced by the splitting wall near the circuit breakers in the sanctuary. A picture of the splitting wall can be seen on the bottom of the slide. In April, J.P. Carroll replaced the malfunctioning or missing gutters that were supposed to be connected to the 6 storm drains that ROTO Rooter had unclogged. Water was being dumped along the side of the building to seep in to ground and enter the basement as groundwater. They connected them to the ground pipes leading to the main line. They also used hidden brackets as stated in the conditions assessment, as opposed to the type that had previously been used. You can see those before and after pictures. We were able to use aluminum gutters because they had been used previously. Effects of moisture. These photos show what's left of a corroded lolly column under the porch area. That's the section of the sanctuary where they bring coffins out of. You also see the surface of our new 1-year-old boiler was covered with corrosion. You see some plaster that's compromised from a roof leaking, which caused that canvas to hang up in the front left-hand side of the church, as well as you see some rotted insulation. The first photo on the left shows one of 3 pits. 2 of the pits have antique sump pumps that have not worked for years, so the water just stands. You also see some of the rotten wood. My favorite picture that looks like you're flying in outer space and looking down on Earth but it is actually one of the pits. That is the picture on the far right. It has 5 feet of groundwater in it that just sits there and has been sitting there for years. The sump pump was supposed to send the water over to the pit which joins the main line to be carried out of the building, but that has not worked for years either. The damage to plaster walls and ceiling over the organ pipes is escalating. Moisture is entering from the deteriorating capstone where the bell coat or steeple was blown off during the hurricane of 1938. Preventing moisture from entering through areas facing the sky will be the focus of Legacy Phase 2. This photo of standing water gives you an idea of how the legs of the air handler and LALLY columns became so corroded. In April, Budget Dry began preparation for the installation of the vapor barrier to the walls and dirt floor to seal out moisture. It required the removal of rotten wood and debris, leveling the ground, removing rocks, etc., to get it ready for the vapor barrier and sump pumps. It took a total of 7 days to complete this installation. The area on the right shows one of the rocky pits which has the most standing groundwater during various times of the year. You saw this area a couple of pictures ago that showed standing water. More photos of ground preparation. More ground preparation, and they are beginning to install the vapor barrier to the walls. The black rolls in the middle photo are a dimpled underlay for installation on the floor under the white plastic. An example is in the first photo on the right. Budget Dry subcontracted a company to bore 2 drainage holes through our 48-inch foundation walls for the installation of proper drainage from the condensate pump of the dehumidifiers to release outside. The state archaeologists granted us permission to do this. The installation of the vapor barrier has been completed. With proper care, this vapor barrier can last us 25 or more years. Sump pumps have come a long way. The picture on the left is our broken sump pump before, and the next 2 photos are the after. The vapor barrier, as you can see, has sealed in the moisture. Phase 2 of our Legacy fundraising campaign was launched in April. As you recall, the conditions assessment identified the roof and sub-level drainage systems as immediate priorities. Phase 1 has addressed primarily the sub-level issues, so Phase 2 will focus on preventing moisture from entering from the roof. This will include replacing 80-plus-year-old copper flashing, which was also noted in our 1996 report as needing repair. It will include built-in copper gutters, roof carpentry and masonry repairs, including replacing the capstone of the bell coat or staple, which was blown off during the hurricane of 1938. It crashed through the roof of the church, crashed through the floor, and landed in the basement, where most of it remains today. In the center, you see a picture on the bottom of the church before the steeple was blown off. This was taken from a postcard in 1910, when the church was called St. Thomas's Episcopal Church. Letters for phase two of Preserving Our Legacy Another 150 Years were mailed out on April 4th. So if you have not received yours yet, you can call the church office to request one or send your check in and just write legacy in the memo. On May 1st, we submitted a 54-page grant application to the State Historic Preservation Office for a reimbursement grant of between $75,000 and $100,000. In order to qualify for this reimbursement, we must first raise $150,000 in our Legacy Phase 2 campaign. The total cost of the roof repairs will be between $225,000 and $250,000. The state board will meet to identify the awardees at the June 1st meeting and make notifications to them shortly after. Pray that we are successful. Well, that concludes my report. Thank you so much.